So, how do people change? How do we make permanent changes in our lives? This is a big question, I think, in both the field of psychotherapy and, more importantly, I think, for individuals who come to therapy, is can we change? And can these changes be lasting changes? And I think this is a very exciting time to be in the field of psychotherapy, both for the therapist and ultimately for the client, that there's so much new science and theory, and more importantly, practice that has now supported that people can make changes in their lives that are actually lasting. Now, maybe to understand that, I would say this is why it hasn't worked for many of us in the past. Why we find people often can build new behaviors, new patterns, formulate goals, but ultimately find themselves disappointed that they haven't reached them. And ultimately they will abandon the therapy or book that they read and go to the next best solution. And this is a fruitless, can be often a fruitless battle. The way people change is by building new neural pathways in their brain that produce desirable behaviors in them that match or in line with their goals and desires of their life. Now, if they do those behaviors long enough, what happens is these behaviors begin to become innate. They begin to get rooted. And as the new behaviors, the new neural pathways are built, the old ones begin to atrophy. When that happens, the new behavior becomes natural now. There is very little desire to go back to the old. Now, before we get there, and this is where I'll go back to the piece I brought up earlier, the danger, of course, is somewhere in that, I'm going to say 4 to 6 week range, and it can change and be different for different people, but just in a general sense, that's where it can happen. In that 4 to 6 week range, something happens. In psychology, they would call it resistance. But what is the resistance, right? Why would we resist something that feels great? Why would we resist something that's on our way to our goals? It doesn't quite intuitively make any sense. And the reason is, it's new. And the brain does not like new things. The brain likes things that are safe and that are familiar. So we go with what is familiar. It's what our neurons want to do. We go to the strongest neural pathways first. And then we may look at the less established neural pathways second. But again, those are very scary for us because they're unknown. They're not clear. It's like a path that hasn't been clearly plowed out and clearly made out for somebody. And there's a fear that maybe this is uncomfortable, and it's anxiety provoking. And the contradiction here, I would say, is anxiety. Look, none of us want anxiety. It's something that in general we have too much of and we try to avoid. And with that said, sometimes anxiety is needed in order for the person to be able to move past, to push past that resistance, to push past the newness requires kind of a little bit of a kick in the butt, so to speak. And that is often what we're afraid to do, because we're also taught to avoid anxiety. If it doesn't feel good, don't do it. Only do it if it feels good. Well, if you only do what feels good, you're not going to be able to change. That old saying, that old adage, there's a reason why they're called adages. There's a reason why they call them, an idiom has its time-tested value. No pain, no gain. And that really backs up the science that we now know, that in order to make changes, we have to go against the grain. We have to do a new behavior that we would not normally do. The difference is we have to kind of accept that new behavior doesn't have to feel good. It just has to be the right behavior. It will eventually feel good. That's the difference. And so this requires a little bit of patience. Not as much as one would think, but it requires patience. And it requires, I think often, it's very valuable to have a psychotherapist who thinks this way, who works with a knowledge of interpersonal neurobiology on your side, because your brain's not going to want to keep up with this. So the job of the therapist is to be there with you, to help you, to be the mind that you, to be your kind of clear mind when you get cloudy, to help you go through that resistance period. Because on the other side of it is a whole new life, really. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a positive thing. We now know that the brain is not so static. It is not stagnant. And we do grow brain cells, contrary to earlier thought that the brain doesn't grow brain cells. They actually do. They call it neurogenesis. But neurogenesis is not an involuntary process. It requires new thoughts and new behaviors. When we choose to think in new ways, to act in new behaviors, we will grow new neurons. And as I said earlier, that can be a little bit uncomfortable in the beginning. I believe that the end results are so rewarding that they far outweigh any of the anxiety and negative effects of that discomfort.